Hello everyone, so this is Lala and today I'm going to make a video ranking all of the Era 2 women that did at least 3 seasons of the show and why I'm doing Era 2 women instead of Era 1 women, especially since I made the Era 1 men. First, well, it's mainly due to season 40. Cara Maria was the last woman who was on season 40 representing Era 2 and she got eliminated. So we have the current data for all the Era 2 women. So it just made sense to do them first. And obviously after the final, which will air and complete in 3 weeks, I'll do all of the other eras per all the other genders as well. So like I mentioned in the prior video, 3 seasons is a good enough reference point to have a resume where you usually are able to get the player's strengths and weaknesses, and obviously more than 3, it only just strengthens that. So based on that, these are the women that I have that did at least 3 seasons on the show. And what's pretty interesting is that even compared to some of the Era 1 women, I do feel like a lot of the Era 2 women are a lot more insular, where most of them either only played in their era or did a few seasons after their era, and that's really it. Not many of them are current on the show, whether they're on All Stars or at the flagship. So it causes them to be different, even compared to some of the Era 1 women. And obviously, once we get to Era 3 and Era 4, those women will be more current. So I'm going to go over the qualifications of how I am going to come up with this ranking. And it is similar to how I rank the Era 1 men, but there are some differences that I will definitely get into. So the first contributing element that I am looking at when I am ranking these women are the competition. So this includes dailies, though not as much, eliminations, and final performances. So essentially, if they won their finals, how many finals they were in, or if they lose their finals. So when it comes to the competitive element, the more early boots that a person has, the lower they are on the list. And for these specific rankings, I'm solely focusing on the first 2 people that are booted to be early boots, just because it's easier and it's cleaner to look at when I'm comparing data. So if you're booted early, more often than not, you're going to be lower on the list. So the next part is final wins and finals reached and people who are close to the finals. So obviously, if you win many finals, meaning you win many seasons, you're going to be higher on the list. If you make it to more finals or a lot of finals, you're going to be higher on the list. But there is an element that I definitely have to look at when it comes to making a certain amount of finals and the amount of finals that you want. So for example, let's just say someone made it to 10 finals, but they only won one of those finals. Just based on that data, it means that they aren't good at finals, which is something that will probably cause them to be lower compared to someone who's made the same amount, if not more, wins compared to that person, but they had less finals appearances. And the third category is people who made it close to the final. So these are the people who were booted in the last 2 rounds before the final. So they made it through most of the season, but they missed out on that final stretch before getting to the final. But they had strong seasons otherwise. But at the same time, if they have a lot of close to final appearances, but not many final appearances, that might be a reason why I have to lower them on the list as well. So I'm taking that into effect. So Era 2 is still a season that had a lot of team challenges, though you saw a bit more pair seasons and a bit more individual seasons compared to the likes of an Era 1, but due to the fact that there's still a lot of team challenges, someone who thrives mainly on large team challenges, but they either didn't appear on other formats of the show or didn't have much, if any, success on individual or pair seasons, they're going to be lower on the list. And also, team challenges tend to inflate the daily numbers, since some people are on teams that win specific dailies, but they either didn't partake in it at all or they performed poorly. So that's something that I have to take into effect as well. And the final category that I am getting into is the elimination record. So this is kind of not confusing, but this is multi-layered. If you're thrown into many eliminations and you win many eliminations, that is good in the elements that you can save yourself when you're in danger. But at the same time, if you're consistently being thrown into eliminations over and over and over and over again, it means that you aren't doing well politically. Unless you're on a season that specifically forces you to go into elimination, whether via a Gauntlet 2 situation or a Skull situation. But that is a rarity. Obviously, if you have a bad elimination record, so you lose many eliminations, you're going to be a lot lower on the list, since it means that you can't pull out that clutch win, and if you're thrown in an elimination, chances are you're going to lose, meaning that the chances of you getting far, getting to the end, or winning is a lot lower. So the second main category that I am factoring when it comes to this list is longevity. So this includes the amount of seasons someone did and whether those seasons took place in a wide bracket of years. So like your first season and your current season has like a gap of 15 years and you've been consistent throughout those years, or you've done a few seasons within the 2 to 3 to 4 year period. So if you have a smaller bracket of years compared to someone who's had a longer bracket of years competed and they have similar records, the person who has less seasons or who only did the show for a lesser time is going to be ranked lower on the list. Because obviously I'm not going to compare someone, or I'm not going to claim someone who has the similar stats as someone who was on twice as long should be better, solely because the data is just so small compared to someone. And when it comes to a show like this, longevity matters, especially when it comes to your skill set, your strategy, and your competitiveness. So obviously the person who's been around for longer and remained successful is going to be better in my eyes, at least in this list. We're comparing people who have done season after season after season, year after year after year, and some of them decade after decade after decade. Also, if you've only done a few seasons or the less seasons in general, will be lower on the list compared to someone who's done more seasons and they have similar data or stats. So someone in general who did very well but they only competed in like 3 or 4 seasons, there's a ceiling as to how high I can put them compared to someone who did twice or thrice the amount of seasons with similar success. But there's a few ways where someone who did 3 or 4 seasons can be higher than someone who did like 12 seasons. But that would be if the person who did 12 seasons was either inconsistent or just sucked in general. But in general, if you have less seasons, you're going to be lower on the list. Due to this, if you've done more seasons and you've been successful throughout the years, the seasons, and the decades, you'll be higher on the list. So yeah, I think I kind of just made this part very clear. So some of these women who has a limited resume, especially compared to some of the great or the ones who have had longevity, they're only going to be so high on the list, and some people might get mad about it, but this is how I have to handle things. So the third main components that I am definitely looking into while creating this ranking are the eras and formats of the seasons that these women took place in. So this isn't going to be as much of a factor like it was for Era 1. One of the reasons is that not everyone makes it to the final, like how in some of those Era 1 seasons, everyone made it to the finals. And there's one season where there was a vote off, but there was some more competitive element to it, so that is somewhat wonky. But after that one season that I'm referring to, which is the island, there aren't any other seasons that have vote outs, where there are 3 seasons in Era 1 that had vote outs. So it's not much of an issue this era, like it was in the prior era. And there are also no seasons where there are absolutely no eliminations. We don't have to worry about that here like we did in Era 1. At the same time, I do have to prioritize success on duo or individual seasons, where individual seasons were a few in this era, and some of the people from this era would perform on individual seasons in future eras. So if you have success there, you will be higher on the list. and Paris season started to become a bit more normalized here, though nowhere near as much as Era 3 or Era 4, but if you have success on pair seasons, you're going to be higher on the list in comparison. Obviously, if you have success in more modern seasons, so in general, I see that as Era 3 and Era 4, but even like modern seasons specifically refers to people who were on seasons a few years ago that they were successful in, you'll be higher on the list because it adds to the longevity element, and modern seasons in general are harder than the seasons in Era 2 and older seasons in general. So I give people who have success in modern seasons more props. With that said, if you mainly competed on team seasons, you will probably be lower on the list compared to someone who has similar stats as a person. So there's that element as well. And the final category that I am adding, though it probably won't be as much of a consideration, is the politics. So this includes stuff like the alliances in a specific season or throughout several seasons that a person was in that caused them to have success on their seasons or throughout their career. Or if you have a lack of alliances throughout your seasons or career, you will probably suffer on the list. And obviously, if you benefit from alliances, you will be higher. Some political moves that was made throughout the season might be mentioned through some of the recaps. That's something that I'm kind of going back and forth on. And also, another element to consider is if they're using their politics to avoid eliminations, that is something that will cause you to be higher on the list, since you're putting yourself in a position where you aren't at risk of going home because you aren't going into eliminations, and you're doing that not because you're a layup, but because you're controlling the house and you are creating a structure that is beneficial to you. So that's kind of really it. And that's it, not just for the politics, but for all of my criteria regarding this list and all the other ones that I'll be making when it comes to ranking each gendered group from each era. So, the first person on this list at 19th place is Shauvon Torres, who competed on the Duel to The Ruins and Cutthroat. Seriously, what is there to really say about her? Shauvon got in some mess on the Duel 2 for sleeping with CT, so most of the women wanted her out, and she lost easily to Anissa on the first elimination. So, it's a bad season, and it's a relatively standard rookie season where the rookie doesn't fit in. She came back for her second season on The Ruins, and she was on the underdog/contenders team, which was a weak team based on the format, but she was performing poorly there, where she probably would have been targeted soon by her own team, but she ruptured her boob, causing her to DQ. And like I mentioned, I'm pretty sure she would have been booted soon anyways, had that not happened. Especially because it wasn't like she was aligned with the likes of the JEK, where they would have protected her like a KC. And then she became a captain on her final season, Cutthroat, due to her being last in the challenge. And her team was pretty strong, but she was a weak person on the team, which caused people like Sarah to be pissed off at her. And Shauvon quit right before she would have faced Katie in an elimination. And I think she quit this because she knew she was going home anyways. Shauvon never made it far on any season, and she only did 3 of them, and she was just really poor in challenges, so her being slow just makes sense. At 18th is Mandi Moyer, who competed on Fresh Meats 2, Cutthroat, Rivals 1, and Battle of the Exes 1. So, I literally forgot about her until I was damn near finished scripting this entire video. Like, I was literally working on the first place person before I realized, oh crap, I'm missing someone, and it happened to have been Mandi. Anyways, she debuted on Fresh Meats 2, where she was paired with Wes. He was running a lot of the house, which meant that she was in a good position, but she had no influence in that group. Neither one of them won a single daily in the game, and Wes's sloppiness bit them in the butt, where they were booted around the 2/3 portion into the season against allies Evelyn and Luke on the season. Her second season, Cutthroat, wasn't a good one for her at all, where her showman's chat threw her under the bus hardcore, and she was eliminated second against Cara, where her team saw her as one of the weakest options. She was paired with Jenn on Rivals 1, and this was actually a good thing for her due to how insulated Jenn was with the established veterans. She almost got them into trouble with trying to hook up with the outcast CT that everyone wanted out, but luckily for her, that blew up in her face and she got closer to Wes. Mandi and Jenn did win a daily and made it to the final, but they performed horrendously on it. I know Jenn was sick on it, but I don't know if Mandi was either, if I'm remembering this correctly, where they were booted on the first day of that final. Her final season was on Battle of the Exes 1, where West performed horrendously politically, which caused them to immediately go into elimination against newbies Priscilla and Nate, and they ended up losing to Leroy and Naomi. Actually, she won both of her rounds against Naomi, and it was mainly West. West was the reason why they went home. It really wasn't her. Ultimately, her resume was pretty short and not that impressive, though there were some signs that she was improving overall. But with just one finals appearance and 2 really poor seasons, I really had nowhere else to put her but here. At 17th place is Melinda Collins on Fresh Meat 1, The Gauntlet 3, Cutthroat, Battle of the Seasons 2, All-Stars 2, and All-Stars 3. So, looking at Melinda's journey throughout the show, it overall hasn't been a good one, and her spot here is pretty warranted. Honestly, if it wasn't for All-Stars, she would have been lower, for sure. Her first season, Fresh Meat 1, had her paired with Ryan, and the entire cast did not like the Austin cast, so she was booted unceremoniously second in the season. On her second season, The Gauntlet 3, she made it around the midway point, maybe a bit past midway, due to her Austin alliance with Johanna, Nehemiah, and Rachel controlling the politics on that team, and also having people like Tori working with them. But she ended up going into elimination because she had an injury at some point, and they didn't really have many other options. But she did lose to Tori. She wouldn't be back for 5 seasons and a few years, where she was single on Cutthroat. There really isn't anything notable to discuss about her time on the season, since she was very under-edited, and also wasn't one of the stronger women when it came to the challenges, where she was booted mid-season against Emily. Her journey on the flagship show ended the same way her journey on the flagship started, everyone hating Dallas, and her being booted second, with her now ex-husband, Danny, where they lost against Camila and Eric. Luckily for Melinda, she had her sole good season on All Stars 2, where she was a part of the King's Palace with Nehemiah and the other people in the alliance. I'm kind of having a brain fart as to who's in that alliance, but they controlled a decent amount of the eliminations in that season. She technically won 2 eliminations, though one of them was given to her by Tina, who literally didn't partake in it, so on that one. And she won with Nehemiah against Jasmine and Laterian. But it's Jasmine. Really just Jasmine. So it's not the most impressive eliminations, but her record is also the same as Jasmine's in that regard, so I guess it is impressive for her. They got third in the season overall, and her final season involved her quitting due to her still being injured from the final last season, so I don't really hold her All-Stars 3 performance against her. In general, she only has 1 good season to her name, which did show improvement overall, but it's only 1 season. She had a few mid-showings and a decent amount of really poor showings, so I had no choice but to put her here. At 16th is Johanna Botta, who competed on Fresh Meat 1, The Gauntlet 3, The Island, and The Ruins. So, I was going back and forth about whether she or the person who I have as 15th should be in the 16th place spot, but just from looking at both of their stats and the longevity factor, I decided to put Johanna here. I want to first off start this by stating that I don't think Johanna is awful or really bad. I do think that in general, Era 2 has the most competitive woman throughout the show's history, so she looks weaker in comparison. At the same time, Johanna really hasn't done anything impressive throughout her career either, and her stats really aren't strong. Her first season, Fresh Meat 1, had her booted very early in the season, being the third one eliminated due to losing to Casey and Wes, and everyone hating the Austin cast. Her second season, The Gauntlet 3, had her in a good position with her real-world Austin allies and others like Tori kissing up to them, so she was never in danger throughout the season, and even Frank stated that she was an okay competitor. So he didn't have any issues with her in that element as well. She never went into elimination that season and was in a good spot politically, and while she won the season, it was mainly due to the veterans screwing up more than anything, which is why The win on the Gauntlet 3 is seen as arguably the weakest win ever. After breaking up with Wes, she entered her third season single and she got very cozy to Kenny, where many people mentioned that she was doing it so he can carry her in the game. She got her key facing a vote against Collie and then lost the face-off right before the final against Evelyn, so nothing impressive. And the weird thing is that the wiki can considers both of these to be elimination losses, but the format of the face-offs was just very weird in general. On her final season, The Ruins, she was a subsidiary of the JEK Alliance, made it a bit past the midway mark, and was unceremoniously booted against Sarah, where she was just checked out. There really just isn't much to talk about with her, and I would consider her either average or a bit below average, and the fact that her career only lasted 3 to 4 years also dinged her here since there's a lack of longevity there, and she didn't do as many seasons as most of the others on this list. At 15th place, I have Janelle Casanave, who played on the Inferno 3, the Gauntlet 3, All-Stars 2, and All-Stars 4. Yes, it was her that I was debating about whether I should rank higher or lower than Johanna, but I think we saw Janelle through a longer period of time, despite her also only competing on 4 seasons, and I do think that her strengths are a bit stronger. Overall, I do think Janelle is such a very weird person to talk about when it comes to her gameplay, as she has really 2 seasons and then she has 2 really bad seasons. So she's really all over the place. And being all over the place in this era of women specifically will have you relatively low on the list. She won a lifesaver during the Inferno 3 and held her own against the likes of Tanya and Evelyn, who are on her team, but I do think she benefited from the other rookie in Jenn being thrown in several times, but you could say that it meant a lot that she was kept safe and they threw Jenn in over and over again. And Janelle ended up winning the season. The Gauntlet 3 was not a good season for her at all, where she was the third woman eliminated on the team and losing to Jillian, and that would be it for her on the flagship show at least, and her challenge career for over a decade after this. She does come back on All Stars 2, where she's aligned with Laurel. Apparently they knew one another from before their reality TV careers, and it caused her to be aligned with the likes of Roberta and Jody and that side of the house as well. She was not targeted for most of the season, though she wasn't really that notable in dailies, but her allies were, which was good and kept her safe. But she was sent into the final elimination when Melinda and Nehemiah won the daily, and with her having a broken back, she and Darrell took out Jody and Brad, the two who were performing very well this season, and it was very impressive that even when she was injured, she took out 2 big threats. And she and Darrell arguably should have won the season. We all know about the janky final by now. She came back on All Stars 4 and quit while before facing an elimination against Tina because of the drama with Ayana, and we have no idea how she would have performed had she not quit. But the fact that she did quit really wasn't a good sign. Janelle has a limited amount of seasons and information, and she's very inconsistent with her performance, so I have no choice but to put her here. At 14th is Casey Cooper, who competed on Fresh Meat 1, The Duel 1, The Gauntlet 3, The Ruins, and All Stars 2. It could be argued that I should switch Janelle with her, or heck, even Johanna, but I think Casey is more consistent, even though her physical abilities ain't all that. Of course, she was partnered with Wes, which meant that they had to go to Excel a bunch of times, where she and Wes took out Danny and Evelyn, Melinda and Ryan, Johanna and Jesse, Tanya and Johnny, and Shane and Lynette on the season. And while that is impressive, when you look beyond the paper, you kind of see some of the faults with this, as they realized that they needed to pack a lot less stuff in their bags, so they essentially kind of just cheated the system. And then some argue that Wes did all the work, so she kind of had to hold her own, but it's definitely faulty. Either way, they never won a daily in the season, which isn't good, and I will say that it says a lot that Casey never won an elimination after this season, so it kind of just makes her record here look even less impressive. The Duel 1 wasn't a notable season for her at all, where she went home kind of early. No, she did go home early as a third woman booted against Robin, who is notably poor in elimination, so the fact that she lost to Robin really isn't a good sign. But Casey would make it far on her 2 other flagship seasons. She was the second to last woman booted on the Gauntlet 3, where she only went in that elimination because Katie was safe that round, and Cole quit knowing that she was going to be nominated, where Casey most likely would have made it to the finals otherwise. And then on the Ruins, her own challengers team wanted to get rid of her because she was so weak, but the champions kept her around because she was an ally, and because they knew that she was a layup for the other team, where she was booted the final round before the final, where there's some alleged suspicious stuff happening within that elimination as well. She did return on All Stars 2 over a decade later and won an individual daily before she had to DQ a bit past the halfway point due to her being pregnant, and who knows how well she would have done otherwise. She's still relatively low on the list, but always seemed to be decent enough politically wise, or at least based on her position in this season, or most of the seasons, and she's rarely an early boot, though her skills as a challenger is kind of less than stellar. At 13th is Teresa Jones, who competed on Fresh Meats 2, Cutthroat, Rivals 1, Rivals 2, Free Agents, Battle of the Exes 2, and Double Agents. I know a lot of people in the fandom mention that she's one of the best people who have never won, and while I agree with some of their points, I can't really say that I fully agree with this thought, to be honest. Though she probably would be higher on the list if she debuted in any of the other eras, instead of Era 2. She was led by Ryan to play the middle on Fresh Meats 2, which got them to the final elimination before the final being taken out by Jen and Noor. She had this entitled as attitude on her second season Cutthroat, which she showed against rookie Camila, though she was on the losing team, and I guess she did decent enough because she did make it pretty far despite her team consistently losing people, and she was taken out in the second to last round, where she was essentially screwed over because she was supposed to be competing against Tori, but due to the mercenary twist, Tina decided to throw her elimination towards Tori, where Theresa probably would have beaten her otherwise. She and Camila were paired together on Rivals 1, and they're performing pretty well in the dailies, but was outplayed when Paula campaigned for her alliance to take her and Camila out, as she saw them as her biggest threat, and they are taken out by Cara, Maria, and Laurel in the second women's round. This is easily her worst performing season. So we move on to Rivals 2, where it really wasn't a good season for her, where she was attached to the layup in Jasmine, and she made the move to accidentally send in her Sherman's Leroy in as she was trying to do a burn vault, but it ended up going horrendously, which showed her biggest flaw, which is her messy politics. They also had a daily thrown to her, and they were sent home against Camila and Jemmy, where her game was exposed on the season. She was on an upswing momentum entering Free Agents, where she won a few dailies on the season, as 2 of them were on teams and 1 of them was a partnered daily. She won an elimination against Camila that was impressive, and while she was still pretty poor politically, was trying to target Laurel but was pussyfooting around it, so she wouldn't be the one to actually do it, she made it to the location change and was eliminated literally right before the final by Laurel. Battle of the Exes 2 is arguably her strongest season from a political and competitive point of view, where she and West won several dailies throughout the season, performed well on other ones that they didn't win, and they are protected by a lot of people. But obviously the Exile twist screwed them over, and she lost a physical elimination to Naya. Luckily, she was able to come back, where she won a physical elimination against Nani, though it is bad that her only final appearance came due to Naya DQing and them needing a replacement. She came back after a long hiatus, and she was a dead ice with people like Nani, but it didn't seem like she was an active target until she won a mini-final with Jay and set up a match with Cam and Ashley, which caused the people in power to turn on her. And she was booted mid-season. Theresa is great at the physical element of the show, though her elimination record is awful, and while some people justify it by saying that she competed against tough competition, the fact that she rarely won any of them, and when you throw it in, chances are she's going to lose, really just isn't a good thing. She also needs the right strategic partner to do well politically, but she's too messy strategically and socially on her own, hence her being here, and she only has one sketchy finals appearance to her name. At 12th is Diem Brown, who competed on Fresh Meat 1, The Duel 1, The Gauntlet 3, The Duel 2, The Ruins, Battle of the Exes 1, Rivals 2, and Battle of the Exes 2. Obviously, Diem is known for her journey throughout the show regarding bringing awareness to ovarian cancer to the point where people really don't discuss her as a game player. Looking at her and Theresa, they actually have pretty similar stats. They made it to a few finals, they did a similar amount of seasons, they have a decent amount of almost finals, and they both have poor elimination records. But in general, I think Diem has less flaws than Theresa, hence me putting her above Theresa. So, Diem partnered with Derek throughout Fresh Meat 1, where they were under the radar for about the first half of the season, but then they started winning the last few rounds, where they made cutthroat moves to send home Shane and Lynette, and Theo and Chanda, but their sneaky gameplay caught up with them, and she was sent home right before the final against Darrell and Aviv. She went right on to the Duel 1, where she was aligned with Jody, Kina, and Robin, which got her to the endgame of the season, but she did lose to Anissa after the latter snaked her during the daily, and she won 3 dailies during the season, which is an individual season, which is impressive. She didn't make it to the final on the Gauntlet 3 due to being in good relations with the men on the team and not being seen as a weak competitor, so she wasn't a victim of the trim the vat strategy. And we all know that the easy mess screwed her out of a win here. Diem would continue her trend of making it deep into a season and being cut right before the final on the Duel 2, where she won her only elimination ever against Jenn and was in allegiance with the powerful people on the season, i.e. Evan, Mark, Brad, Landon, Rachel, Tori, Rachel. Ooh, I think I said her name. Ignore the second Rachel, I don't know why I said that. And Brittany. Though she lost literally right before the final against Brittany in the same physical elimination that she won a few rounds prior. Her worst season was easily The Ruins, where she was randomly nominated and lost to Tanya, though there is some speculation that she only did the season for an appearance check and orchestrated her demise, which honestly makes sense since all of her friends on the other team would have protected her under normal circumstances. Anyways, she took a few seasons off where she came back to be partnered with CT on Battle of the Exes 1, where they were in a decent position throughout most of the season, and started winning during the final 2 dailies, though they protected Johnny and Camila in the second to last round, instead of Paula and Dunbar and Ty and Emily, and threw in Johnny and Camila against Robin and Mark in the final elimination, where Mark threw it to Johnny, causing them to lose, though it's alleged that Johnny and Camila might have cheated in the final. Her real final season took place on Rivals 2, where she did win an No, she didn't. She won a daily, but she wasn't liked at all by a lot of the women, and she was paired with Anissa throughout the season, with CT not even protecting her anymore, though Johnny still was, and they lost the final elimination, which is familiar to her, to Jimmy and Camilla. And then she was on Battle of the Exes 2, partnered with CT yet again, and they DQ'd after 2 missions since her illness came back, and it was unfortunately fatal. Obviously, she was good with aligning herself politically to strong, reliable allies, which is why she made it to the end on most of her seasons, and she was pretty good in the dailies. But her elimination record is really bad, as she only did 2 finals despite appearing on so many seasons. Obviously, rest in eternal peace to her. At 11th is Jillian Zoboroski, who competed on The Gauntlet 2, The Gauntlet 3, and Fresh Meat 2. So, honestly, I'm not the most sure of her placement now that I'm really looking over everyone. And I also think that it's because she's also someone that is pretty easy to forget. Her first season was The Gauntlet 2, where the rookies heavily disregarded and discouraged any sort of alliances taking place, and she definitely had her part in that, with the mess involving Susie and Cara and how she relayed that message. She was pretty under the radar for most of the season, but she wasn't doing poorly enough to be sent in, where the rookie team was all about sending in the people who did poorly in the challenges, until the final women's round, where she was sent home against Kina, but the fact that this is her worst season ever is impressive, though she performed better than some of the women who were protected that round. I do think that looking over everything, Jillian's lack of a political game is her biggest fault now that I'm really going through all of her seasons. She and her showman Frank were on the out of the rookie team on the Gauntlet 3, causing them to go in several times, where she did beat Angel, Brooke, and Janelle in eliminations. Two of them really aren't strong performers, and the third one's debatable, and held her own in the dailies, but it got her that win, despite it being janky due to Eric. But she actually had to fight to get there, unlike a lot of the others on that team. Her final season, Fresh Meat 2, consisted of her struggling politically, since she was not in the majority alliance, and she was thrown in on the very first exile against Cara Maria and Darrell, though she was the pawn in that situation. She and her partner Pete only had Kenny and Laurel as allies, which is definitely bad, but the latter were able to win several dailies in the season, which helped protect them. She and Pete did win a daily and won another elimination against Sandy and Denny, but she made it to her second final and placed third overall. Obviously, what hurts Jillian here is her small sample size, her season being like 15 to 20 years old and competing in like a 4-year time frame, and her political allegiances. But she has never had a bad season. But she only had 3 seasons, and I really just can't put her any higher, since there's a ceiling when it comes to people like her who's done a few seasons but does very well. So, right in the middle of this ranking, at 10th is Tori Hall, who competed on the Gauntlet 3, the Duel 2, and Cutthroat. I was really going back and forth as to who I should rank higher out of herself and Jillian. And when I was looking at Jillian's stats, she won more dailies, though that was because she was on more team seasons, where Tori was on an individual season, and she won a lot more eliminations. But the main difference between the two of them was politically, and I do think Tori stood out more in that element, and Tori also did well on an individual season, which we couldn't say for Jillian, who never did an individual season, so that gave Tori the advantage. In general, it is hard to speak about her, since she only did 3 seasons, and it's a minimal amount to be considered for this list. And I also think another element as to why it's hard to talk about her is that Brad is such a key part of her journey on the show. Not only just personality and showman's-wise, but strategy-wise as well, where some might consider her to be a +1 to him rather than her own player. She was a rookie on the Gauntlet 3, where she aligned with the real-world Austin people who had the power on her team, and she just commanded respect, despite her being a true rookie, so she wasn't given that rookie treatment. Tori did take out Melinda in an elimination, though that really isn't much of an accomplishment, and despite the drama that she got herself into with Frank and Jillian, they were able to come together at the end. Tori found herself in the dominant women's alliance with Rachel, Brittany, and Diem, which protected her throughout most of the season, and they were also attached to the strong men on the season. Though she herself didn't win a single daily on the season, but she was eliminated by Anissa in the second to last women's round in a physical elimination. Her final season was Cutthroat, where she and Brad had tight alliances with people like Dunbar, Tyler, Paula, and a few others to control the dynamics on their red team, throwing in newer players like Brandon and Camila in several eliminations to protect herself and her allies, and she had an elimination thrown to her by mercenary Tina, and they also won 2 dailies. She was able to get Dunbar to side with them instead of Tyler at the endgame to save Brad, and Paula was voted in over her during the last woman's elimination before the final, where she won her second season. Looking at her 2 wins, though, they're definitely weaker wins due to being team formats, and the other teams on those seasons mainly flaming out more so than her teams thriving. But she always found herself in a good position politically on all of her seasons, and she could hold her own on team seasons and an individual one. But she only did 3 seasons, and those 3 seasons were done in like a 3 to 4 year time frame. So like Jillian, there's a ceiling to how high I could put Tori. Entering the single digits at 9th is Jenn Grijalva, hopefully I said that correctly, who played on the Inferno 3, The Island, The Duel 2, Fresh Meat 2, cutthroat and rivals won. Obviously, the main thing Jenn is known for is her entitlement regarding the game and her poor record in finals, but we have to look more into it. She definitely got the rookie treatment on the Inferno 3, where she was thrown into 3 eliminations, even over the likes of Janelle, who is also a rookie, beating the likes of Rachel and Coley, not notable names, which is why some discredit her. But she did lose to Susie in the second to last round before the final for the women. Her second season was The Island, where she realized that she needed to get in good with this majority group in order to have a chance in the game, where she got an easy key against Ashley, who was crippled and needed to go home anyways. But she was on the losing boat with Ryan, Paula, and Robin during the final. And I think this is where you start to slowly see her mentality about the game change. The Duel 2 is easily her worst season, but when you really look at it, it isn't even a bad season for her at all. So if her quote-unquote worst season is the Duel 2, then she never really had a bad season. Of course, she wasn't in the majority alliance this season, meaning that her time on the season would always be limited, and her hookup with Rachel could only take her so far. Jenn did go into elimination and beat Katie and Kimberly, but she ended up losing to Diem, which was Diem's only elimination win, which you can feel however you want to feel about that. Her strongest political season was easily on Fresh Meat 2, where she came in with a pre-game alliance with Russ, where she was going to spy on the other side and report it all to him, where she was supposed to pretend to be a floater, but she realized, okay, I can actually be a floater between both sides, which she and Ryan definitely took advantage of the entire season to better position themselves. She flipped to Kimmy's side at the right time, and then beat Ryan and Theresa with her partner Noor in the very final elimination before the final, only for her and Noor to get last on the final, which wouldn't be the first or the last for her. She didn't go into elimination for that season, and she didn't go into elimination in her final 2 seasons either, since she was in good with the veterans and we saw her in a solid position on Cutthroat, even with her team losing, where she and Emily were the only members of the blue team who made it to the final, and I believe she's the only one who didn't go into elimination the entire season from that team. And then on her final season, Rivals, she made it to the final with Mandi, and they shockingly made it to where they won a daily, but they got last in the final again, where they were booted before the first day of the final ended, but Jenn was sick here. Jenn is a solid enough competitor, though she didn't win many dailies, and her elimination wins aren't against the strongest competitors, but she's never actually had a poor season, and made the final on a majority of her seasons, while becoming better politically. Another thing that I do have to consider is that all of her seasons really took place in like a 4-year time frame, so her longevity compared to some of the others is on the weaker end as well. At 8th is KellyAnne Judd, who played on The Island, The Ruins, Battle of the Bloodlines, Rivals 3, Battle of the Eras, All-Stars 1, All-Stars 3, and World Championship. KellyAnne is someone who is so ridiculously inconsistent, where it is a bit hard for me to rank her. The Island was her debut season, where she really only had Evelyn on her side, as the Bananas and Kenny side of the house really wanted her gone, but she won a face-off against Rachel, giving her a key to the final, but it was stolen last minute by Ryan, and she was eliminated right before the final on the season, where she lost that face-off to Evelyn, if I'm remembering it correctly. KellyAnne did do the ruins and only had Evelyn, who threw an elimination to her so she, i.e. Evelyn, could leave, and her boyfriend at the time, Wes, who left midway through the season as allies. But she performed strongly in the dailies, though she was on the losing contenders team, where the woman on the opposite team didn't want to face her in eliminations, and the people on her team wanted to keep her safe because they would have needed her to do well in a final, where she and Sarah were the only 2 people on their team who made it to the finals, and they actually almost won the season, which was very impressive. KellyAnne retired for like 6 years, if I'm remembering it correctly, and Diem's death inspired her to come back, where she had pretty mid performances, where she was paired with her cousin Anthony on Battle of the Bloodlines. They had opposing alliances, and she went against Nanny. KellyAnne was on the losing team that season, so she was the one who did the eliminations out of she and her cousin. And she also lost against Jenna mid-season once Johnny threw her cousin under the bus, essentially. A similar trajectory happened for her on Rivals 3, where she was partnered with Jamie and they beat Nelson and Amanda in elimination, but they're sent home the following round, if I'm remembering correctly, mid-season against Nanny and Wes. I did notice that she didn't really win dailies during her first 4 seasons, or they weren't her strong suit. KellyAnne was off the show for a while, but she did return to All-Stars 1, where she did win 2 dailies in the season, never went into an elimination, performed well out of the women, and she would have won the season if one person per gender won, but due to the solo winner format, she got 3rd overall for that season. Though you can mention that the season really wasn't notable politically, really from anyone. This would continue on All-Stars 3, where she did win a daily on the season, but she did have an elimination cancelled with Kayla later on in the season due to Veronica's DQ, but Kayla would send her home with 4th place on the season, though she made it to the final there. This was another season where KellyAnne really wasn't in a good position politically, where she was outcasted with Kendall. She then returned on I have to discuss World Championship first, where she was thrown under the bus by Jonay in the first elimination, where she and her partner Tristan won the elimination against Nelson and Jujuri. She really wasn't a part of the numbers, but she was very important to the flip that happened, I believe, against Johnny and Justine in the middle of the season. But after that move was made, she and her side pretty much lost consistently to the point where she and Tristan were taken out against Darrell and Kiki relatively late on the season. She then returned on Battle of the Eras, where she is eliminated first on the season due to her getting last in the first daily, meaning she automatically had to go into elimination, and losing to Cara Maria in an elimination. KellyAnne is good physically and can keep up competitively, but she does freak out at times and is very weak politically, causing her to be all over the place with her career. She is returning for All-Stars 5, and it'll be interesting to see how she performs there. Another note that I have to mention about KellyAnne is that her elimination record really isn't that good, and if anything, it's kind of getting weaker as time goes on, so that part of her game might not be aging well. At 7th is Emily Schromm, who competed on Cutthroat, Battle of the Exes 1, Rivals 2, and Battle of the Eras. So, the one thing that needs to be taken into consideration is the limited amount of seasons Emily did, so she always had a ceiling regarding how high I put her. But compared to people who have the same issue, like a Tori and a Jillian, I placed Emily higher because I felt like her 3 seasons were harder than their 3 seasons, as a majority of their seasons were large team seasons, where Emily only had 1 season like that, and her solo team season was a lot harder compared to theirs, and she thrived in 2 pair seasons. So that's why Emily's a lot higher than Jillian and Tori. So her first season was on Cutthroat, where she was on the weaker blue team, but stuck around because she's a good performer, but her being a rookie caused her to go into elimination a few times, where she did beat Melinda, who is relatively weak in eliminations, and Paula, who is a mixed bag in elimination, so you could debate about those. But she made it to her first final with Jenn, which is impressive to make it as a rookie, where most of her team was eliminated, and she really fought for her spot on that final. Her second season, Battle of the Exes 1, involved her being paired with Ty, where they really were not involved much in the politics of the season, and with them being a newer pair on a season where the rookies were out immediately, they still kind of received some of that rookie treatment. They didn't win a daily throughout the season, and caused them to be sent into 3 eliminations, where they beat Leroy and Naomi, Abram and Cara Maria, and Dunbar and Paula. So not the strongest names, but some that are decent. But Emily made it to her second consecutive final, but she yet again got last in this final. Her third and final season for a while was on Rivals 2, where she was paired up with Paula, and they dominated the women's side from the very beginning. Not only did they win damn near all of the dailies of the season, technically not all, but they won 60% of the dailies, where they won they won 6 dailies throughout the season, and there's only 10 pre-final dailies, and all of the men wanted to work with them in the final and wanted to protect them, so they were in a really good position there. And she and Paula ended up winning the season. Since the show doesn't really consider champs versus stars stats, and I didn't include it in my Era 1 male video, I'm not going to talk about it here for her. Emily came back briefly for Battle of the Eras, where she was on Era 2, but Laurel throwing the daily when she was a leader caused her to face Tina, and she left very early on, though some claim that the elimination was very janky. Emily is impressive, but her limited amount of seasons, and all of them being either on paired seasons or a team season, and her early boot on Eras definitely had me drop her a bit. At 6th is Paula Meronek, who competed on the Duo 1, the Inferno 3, the Gauntlet 3, the Island, the Duel 2, Fresh Meat 2, Cutthroat, Rivals 1, Battle of the Exes 1, and Rivals 2. Paula's career didn't start off on a good note at all, where she was the second woman booted to Anissa on the Duo 1 due to the Key West cast getting the rookie treatment. She returned the next season and was the strongest woman on the Good Guys team, where the men actively wanted to keep her around, and she did get her revenge on Anissa, beating her in the elimination, where Paula would get her first final on the season, though she lost the season. She continued the stride on the Gauntlet 3, where she was not a part of the trim the fat strategy on the guys' part, since they saw her as a useful woman to keep her around, and this would be one of the main reasons why Paula is considered a pick-me by some fans, but it worked for her politically, at least throughout the first stretch of her career. But it got Paula to her second consecutive final, where she also beat Katie in the final elimination of the season, which really isn't much of a brag, but it's also her second consecutive final loss. She went on with her typical strategy of aligning with the Johnny, Kenny, Evan, Derek side of the house, though Evan wasn't on the island. But she would win a face-off against Jen and Ashley and was under the impression that she would join their boat in the final, but was betrayed when Evelyn was chosen instead of her, though it was really for Dunbar, meaning that Paula was never going to be on their boat, but she didn't realize that. Overall, Paula would make it to her third consecutive final, where she also lost her third consecutive final. She had one of her worst seasons on the Duo 2, where she chose to save Dunbar over MJ in the second vote, which pissed off her alliance, and she was essentially kicked out of it for the rest of the season. But she was somehow able to make it roughly 2/3 throughout the season, but it showed how messy she can be politically. Her downward spiral continued on Fresh Meats 2, where she was the third one booted, and she's lucky that this isn't considered an early boot due to the rules that I've stated about people who were booted in the first 2 rounds being quoted under the early out. But in all intents and purposes, this was also an early out for her. But this mainly happened due to her losing against Luke and Evan with her partner. I think her partner's name's Jeff. I don't really care to remember his name. Due to her siding with Kenny and not being in the majority alliance at that time. She was on the red team on Cutthroat, where she was in the majority alliance of that season, but was thrown under the bus to get sent into the final elimination against Emily, where her team decided to protect Tori over her, where Paula did go home. She probably wins the season if she makes it through that elimination. Things would take an uphill turn for Paula during her last stretch of her challenge career, where she and Evelyn were easily the best female pair of Rivals 1, where they won 4 dailies on the season, and all the guys wanted to protect them in the house. And Paula actually pulled a good political move to get Theresa and Camila, who were performing well in dailies out of the women, sent home via Laura and Cara Maria, where Paula got her first win. I also forgot to mention that she and Evelyn easily beat Anissa and Robin during the first elimination of that season, and it ended the long season elimination battle between herself and Anissa, if I'm remembering it correctly. Battle of the Exes 1 was a decent enough season for her, where she and Dunbar were booted in the second to last round of the season before the final against Emily and Ty, and they did win 1 daily during the season. Paula's final season is a great one for her, where she won 6 out of the 10 dailies with Emily throughout the season, and they never went into an elimination, where they steamrolled the women's side throughout the season, and she got her second win, ending her career on a high note. Paula's stats are somewhat similar to a KellyAnne based on the amount of seasons they did, and their elimination record, which is not good at all, and Paula's elimination record is one of the reasons why she isn't higher. But she made it to a lot more finals compared to a KellyAnne, and she won a few seasons, so that's why she's a bit higher here. And Paula is inconsistent politically, but she showed a lot of strengths when it comes to the physical and mental elements, as she got better politically throughout her career. At fifth, I have Sarah Rice, who competed on The Ruins, Fresh Meat 2, Cutthroat, Rivals 1, Battle of the Exes 1, Battle of the Seasons 2, Rivals 2, Battle of the Exes 2, and Rivals 3. So, literally up until right before I decided to record this part, she was at number 4. I felt like she had a bit more longevity compared to the other person I had at 4th, and when looking at their data, they actually had similar stats. And that's with me taking out Sarah's 2 DQs. But when I really looked at it, I felt like Sarah's early boots were more of her fault compared to the other person that I have at 4th. So that's why she is now 5th. Sarah started her career on a high note, where she was a rookie on the Ruins and was arguably the best performer out of everyone on that team. And she went in to beat Katie and Johanna in elimination. Not the strongest names, but she herself was a rookie, so we didn't know how she would do. And she and KellyAnne were close to winning the entire season, and it is impressive that she made it through all those rounds as a newbie, where her entire team but one was booted on that season. Her second season was horrible, and there's really no way around it, as she chose the wrong side in the beginning, Team Kenny, and was very overconfident, causing her and Vinny to be sent into exile with Kenny and Laurel, where she became the second boot. Her third season was somewhat of a recovery, as she was the second best woman on the team, but she had an entitled attitude throughout the season. But she performed well enough in the dailies, and she was never sent to elimination all season, even over someone like Laurel. Only for her to flame out in the final, though that might have been due to them drinking some bad water or something along the lines of that. But despite her attitude on that season, it was a good performance for her. Though they would have won the season had she and Abram not flamed out, and Abram doesn't get the same amount of smoke for flaming out that Sarah does, so you can argue that as well. Sarah's arrogance and cockiness with a swift fall would continue on to Rivals 1, where she was attached to Caitlyn, who was a notably weak competitor, but they ended up in the third female elimination due to the latter performing badly on the daily, but it was Sarah, specifically, who lost the elimination for them, where she was so overconfident about beating Janae and Jasmine in anything, so this was humbling. Because of my rule about only the first 2 people out are considered elite outs, Sarah's performance in the season didn't make it on that criteria when it came to the data, but in all intents and purposes, it was still a bad season. So, Sarah would have bad luck in situations like Battle of the Exes 1, where she and Vinny won the daily, but because he decided to harass and violate Mandi, she was DQ'd early right along with Vinny, where she could have gotten far in the season otherwise. This would also happen to her on Rivals 2, where she was partnered with Trishelle and was DQ'd with her because Trishelle quit due to medical reasons and getting into drama. I can't hold Sarah responsible for those 2 early outings because she wasn't DQ'd due to anything of her own doing, and if she was at fault for those DQs, I would definitely criticize her for that, but I can't in this scenario. Though I don't know how far she would have made it on Rivals 2, just because of how annoying Trishelle was to people, and they weren't performing the strongest. So we did see Sarah out of her comfort zone on Battle of the Seasons 2, where Team Brooklyn was targeted alongside Fresh Meat and Austin, since they were all seen as the veterans, and when most of the veterans went home, she was able to make it through, but it was due to her and Chet mainly eliminating Brennan and Carmaria, and Mackenzie and Preston. But Brooklyn laid low when the other teams that were aligned with one another started infighting, causing them to not really be targeted for the rest of the season, and they won 2 dailies during the latter portion of the season, but they got third primarily because of Devin being in the finals, where if they got rid of her, and maybe JD to a lesser extent, she and Chet could have easily won that season. Her final 2 seasons involved partner seasons, where she was with Jordan on Battle of the Exes 2, and they played the medal between Johnny and Wes, while during the first half of the game, laying low when they needed to, and really kicking it up in the dailies during the end game of the season, though they won a daily earlier on in the season as well. It was mainly Sarah who was thriving in the political element and the social element during their partnership. She and Jordan did send Jonay and Zach home, and she made the move to cut Bananas and Nani, which was definitely what got Sarah her first win. And then on her final season, Rivals 3, was where she was with Bananas, and they completely steamrolled the season as they won a bunch of dailies throughout the season, and they were aligned with Jenna and Vince, who are the second strongest team as well, due to Vince and Bananas being cousins. And everyone else was finding really hard to be the third person in that alliance. You could definitely criticize the cast being weak competitively, and I don't blame anyone for making that critique. She and Bananas easily wins the season, and she won the last elimination with Bananas against Nicole and Dario, despite her getting the money stolen. Sarah is very well-rounded in politics. She actually got better in that element. She's very good in mental stuff, and she can hold her own physically as well. And outside of her 2 DQs, her stats are very similar to who I have as number 4. But Sarah did a lot more pair seasons compared to team seasons, and honestly, I feel like I could be easily talked into switching her at 4th and placing the person that I have at 4th as 5th. But as of right now, as I'm recording this, I have her at 5th. At 4th is Evelyn Smith, who competed on Fresh Meat 1, The Inferno 3, The Gauntlet 3, The Island, The Ruins, Fresh Meat 2, and Rivals 1. Yes, she used the person that I considered putting at 5th, and I did have her at 5th over Sarah up until right before I got to recording Sarah's part, and then I made a last minute switch. The reason for this was because 1, Evelyn has less longevity than Sarah. 2, they actually do have similar stats once you don't consider Sarah's DQs when it comes to the eliminations, the finals, and the amount of good and bad seasons that they had. But then I really thought about it. Evelyn's bad seasons are a lot better than Sarah's worst seasons, and Evelyn won more than Sarah did, as she has a higher win to final ratio compared to Sarah. But one of the reasons why I considered putting her lower was because Evelyn mainly thrived in the team's era, and a lot of her seasons are in the large team era seasons. But ultimately, I switched them. I'm sure many people aren't going to like her placement on this ranking in general, but like I mentioned from the beginning of this video and in my other video, I am heavily considering longevity and the era of the seasons that you did. She was the first boot on Fresh Meat 1, mainly due to being partnered with Danny, and we all know how his track record is, and people just didn't care for the real world Austin cast. She returned on the Inferno 3, where she was considered to be one of the guys, based on her performance on the Badasses team, where she wasn't sent into elimination at all, partially due to her being very valuable, and because the other women were scared of her. She won the final lifesaver of the season and ended up winning her first season here, so she went from the first boot to a winner within a season. She was fine with the trimming the fat strategy that the veteran men had on the Gauntlet 3, since she does believe men are stronger and better than the women, and she knew that she was one of the few women who could actually keep up with the men. She was about to face, and let's be honest, beat Cole in an elimination, but the latter quit, causing her to easily take out Casey, and she ended up losing the final due to Eric flopping in it. The first half of her career is very different than her second half of her career, where she was on the opposite side of what will become the JEKD Alliance, as she sided with KellyAnne on the island, and she didn't have much numbers. She won a face-off, stole Banana's key, only to have it stolen from her the round afterwards, but she sold her soul to the Devils, i.e. Bananas, Kenny, and Derek, to join their final boat so they could all win, which ended up happening. On the Ruins, she aligned with Wes and KellyAnne, who were all public enemy number 1, and she volunteered to go into elimination to take out Casey, but was gypped when she was voted in to compete against KellyAnne instead, where she threw the elimination to go home second because she didn't want to work with the Devils again. She was a last-minute addition to Fresh Meat 2, where she immediately aligned with Wes, and they were able to get the numbers for the first half of the season, but their overconfidence caused them to lose those numbers, with Danny and Sandy and CJ and Sydney going home. I forgot to mention that she went into 3 eliminations this season, sending Paula and Jeff home early on, and then having to face Wes and Mandi when the numbers went against them, and she lost the final elimination for herself and Pete, where they lost against Landon and Carly. Then her final season took place on Rivals 1, where she was paired with Paula, and based on how the Rivals were formed, it forced the two sides going after one another over the last few seasons to all work together, where she and Paula won 4 dailies in the season. They immediately took out Robin and Anissa in elimination, and she ended her career with a third win, and this one being a paired win instead of a team win, which definitely boosted her up, in my opinion. Obviously, Evelyn is one of the greatest women to be on the show, but she's messier politically than I remembered, and most of her success was on team seasons, though we did see her do well on a few paired seasons. The others above her just have more longevity, and we've seen them thrive in and do individual seasons, where Evelyn really did the show for a 4 to 5 year time frame, so her longevity isn't as strong as the woman above her. The bronze prize of third place goes to Camila Nakagawa, who competed on Cutthroat, Rivals 1, Battle of the Exes 1, Battle of the Seasons 2, Rivals 2, Free Agents, Battle of the Bloodlines, Rivals 3, Invasion of the Champions, and Dirty 30. Honestly, a part of me wanted to put her lower, especially comparing her stats to the two people I have above her, and heck, even some of the people that I have immediately below her. But I do think that Camila benefits because she debuted when the large team season started to end on the show compared to some of the others below her. So, most of her stats are from the perspective of pair/individual seasons. Her first season is Cutthroat, where she definitely got the rookie treatment from her red team, which made her on the out of that team, despite being one of the strongest women on the team, where she won 2 eliminations against Emily and Katie, not the strongest names, only to get booted by Laurel roughly around the 2/3 portion of the season. Her sophomore season was Rivals 1, which was definitely a poor season for her, where she was the second female team booted with Theresa, but it's mainly due to them being outplayed on a political point of view, where Paula saw her team as the second best in dailies, got them thrown in where they lost to Laurel and Maria. Camila was able to get her first win with Battle of the Exes 1, where she was paired with Johnny Bananas, and he had connections to people like Mark and Robin, causing them to be in a powerful position throughout the season. They won 3 dailies in the season and beat Mark and Robin. She genuinely beat Robin during her part in the final elimination of the season, where they eventually won. The Fresh Meats team were a huge target on Battle of the Seasons 2, partially because they initially weren't on the season, and 2 because they were seen as veterans, so they all had to go into elimination several times. During the short time they were there, they didn't win any dailies. She beat Danny and Melinda in the elimination with Eric, only for him to throw their second elimination together against Devin and JD, causing her to be the 4th woman booted and be a part of the 4th pair booted in the season. So not early enough where they're considered early boot according to my standards, but it's an early season nonetheless. She was paired with Jamie on Rivals 2, where they were actually a pretty under-the-radar team politically, and they did win 1 mission on the season, but the duo did end up beating Jasmine and Theresa and Anissa and Diem in the elimination. So, interesting names there, where they did get 3rd place. And it was Camila who mainly made Jamie look like a good player, so I do give her props for that. She would go on to have a dry spell for a few seasons after this, where she only won a daily on Free Agents and was at mid-season where she kind of gave up during her elimination with Theresa. She was booted on Battle of the Bloodlines because her sister lost in an elimination, and the house knew that they could get Camila out this way without her being in an elimination. And honestly, she was definitely screwed due to the janky format of the season more than anything else, and she technically was on the winning team. The dry spell continued on to Rivals 3, where she was paired up with Tony, where they didn't win a single daily and were too busy fighting one another, to the point where they got DQ'd due to it midway through the season. And this dry spell was also one of the reasons why I wanted to put her lower. But luckily for her, Camila's final 2 seasons bumped her up on this list exponentially, where she won a daily, and the champions had less opportunities to do challenges this season due to the format, gave Laurel her first elimination loss right before the final, and was able to become a runner-up, and it was her first time making it to the final since Rivals 2, which was 3 years prior, and this was an individual season. First, she was competing against heavy hitters. Her final season, Dirty 30, is easily her strongest season, despite her horrendous personality, where she did align with a lot of the stronger women, i.e. Maria, Jenna, and Kayla from the beginning of the season, and she ended up running it, essentially. She won 6 dailies amongst many different formats of those dailies throughout the season, and winning eliminations against Jemmye, not the strongest name, and Brittany, who won 2 eliminations before this on the season, where she beat Cara Maria and Tori in the final, winning her final season against 2 tough opponents. The fact that she did well on 2 individual seasons definitely brought me up a lot on her, though her elimination record isn't the strongest compared to everyone who is on the top 5 from this era, but it's still strong enough. And she isn't the strongest politically, though she wasn't really sloppy. Sorry, she was really sloppy in this element, and she competed on harder seasons compared to many of the other Era 2 women, which warranted a spot, or a high spot on this list in my opinion. The silver prize of second place goes to Cara Maria Sorbello, who competed on Fresh Meats 2, Cutthroat, Rivals 1, Battle of the Exes 1, Battle of the Seasons 2, Rivals 2, Free Agents, Battle of the Bloodlines, Invasion of the Champions, Dirty 30, Vendettas, Final Reckoning, War of the Worlds 1, War of the Worlds 2, All Stars 4, and Battle of the Eras. So I actually had her at number 1 for a while when it came to the Era 2 woman, but it just made less and less sense the more and more I looked into it. She did well in the qualifications on Fresh Meats 2, but ended up going home first to Jillian and Pete after being chosen by Darrell and Wes wanting to get revenge on him. Her second season Cutthroat had her seen as the weakest or the second weakest woman on the Grey Team, which Laurel and Sarah mentioned several times, but Abram was protecting her, and she had to win an early elimination against Mandi on the season, but the Grey Team won a lot but fell apart once they made it to the final. She and Laurel were partnered on Rivals 1, where they really weren't in the main alliance, as they were thrown into 2 eliminations, where they beat Theresa and Camila and Jonay and Jasmine, and also winning a daily, but they ended up getting second place on the season. Her next 2 seasons really weren't notable ones, as she and Abram lacked allies and lost to Emily and Ty midway through Battle of the Exes 1, and I believe they got into elimination that round because they lost the elimination. And she was also out early on Battle of the Seasons 2, where while she did win the first elimination with Eric against Wes and Casey, she lost with Brandon to Sarah and Chet on the 3rd elimination, and we all know that this was due to the freshman team being added last minute, and they were seen as the veterans compared to the all-newbie cast who wanted to make names for themselves. Rivals 2 was a season where she came in last minute, and this happened a few times at around this point in her career, and she was partnered with Cook, where she performed pretty poorly in the dailies, outside of one late daily, and they went against Anastasia and Jessica and Jonay and Nani on their season, making it as a runner-up on their season, but it looked like she was the rookie, and the actual rookie in Cook was the veteran who had to calm her down a lot, so that was kind of interesting. She went into multiple eliminations on Free Agents, winning against Naya, Latoya, and Jessica, not the strongest names, maybe Naya in eliminations, winning 2 dailies and losing to Laurel soon before the final on the season. Cara Maria would win her first season on Battle of the Bloodlines with her cousin Jamie, where they had a side of the house that they were working with, winning the final 2 eliminations where she and her cousin beat Johnny and Bananas, and she then booted Anissa right afterwards. Invasions was one of her weakest seasons, but with the format of the season, she ended up being booted second out of the champion woman. Cara Maria would go on a streak where she made it to the final for her next 5 seasons straight, going from Dirty 30, where she won many challenges, was aligned with Jenna, Kayla, and Camila, and won the final redemption to get the runner-up on that season, winning Vendettas as the first sole winner, staying out of elimination and winning a few dailies, getting last in the Final Reckoning final, as she didn't have much allies in the season outside of Bananas and Polly when he eventually came back, losing in elimination to Nelson and Shane, and winning a redemption against Cam and Katie. She was officially in a relationship with Polly on War of the Worlds 1, where they both won a lot of dailies. She, with her partner Thea, won 5 dailies in the season. She never went into elimination and got 5th in the final. She was in a large alliance with Polly, Cam, Kaylee, Ashley, Ninja, Joss, Rogan, Andy, and probably a few others on War of the Worlds too, where she was kind of just helping them, where she wasn't actually running it herself. Rich ran the season after an early coup, never seeing an elimination despite Laurel and Johnny Bananas trying their best to get her into elimination, and became a runner-up. And it's crazy because she was seen as one of the weaker women on the team, according to that other side. She would be put on a 4-year hiatus where she would make her return on All Stars 4, and she really didn't miss a beat, where she won the first daily and was really in the battle group, where the people who were in that group were eligible for elimination during that season. So she was one of the best women on the season. But when she was eligible to go into elimination, she was always sent into elimination, which happened causing her to beat Rachel and Cam, two tough opponents. She got second on the season overall and would have won without the star twist. On Battle of the Eras, she was sent into elimination immediately where she beat KellyAnne despite getting second overall in the first daily, but Laurel and Bananas wanted to take a shot. She won a daily on the season and played a more under-the-radar game where she was booted against Tori right before the final. And she put in a lot of work on a social game this season, where that was a flaw of hers in most of her prior seasons. Obviously, her being in as many finals as she has been in is very impressive, but it also shows that her only winning 2 out of the 10 of them indicates that she isn't good at finals, which is one of the main reasons why I couldn't put her at first. Her politics and social game has been a weakness for a lot of her run, but she has clearly been improving on that in recent years. But she has the most longevity out of everyone who played or who debuted on this era, and it really shows in her record. And the gold prize of first place goes to Laurel Stucky, who played on Fresh Meat 2, Cutthroat, Rivals 1, Free Agents, Invasion of the Champions, War of the Worlds 2, Ride or Dies, Battle of the Eras, and All Stars 4. For a while making this video and creating the list, Laurel wasn't at the very top of it. But I ultimately changed my mind, clearly. Her first season was Fresh Meat 2, and because Kenny was her partner, Laurel had her back against the wall from the beginning, but they won several dailies, 5 if I'm remembering correctly, and they won the second elimination against Sarah and Vinny, where most of that was due to her, as Kenny was not the best competitor from a challenge point of view. And her beating Sarah was very impressive, who just came off a hot rookie season. They made it to the final and got second place, which was a good showing for her. Laurel continued this momentum on her second season, Cutthroat, where she was the strongest woman on her team, and their team won a lot of dailies on that season, where she did beat Camila in the elimination and made it to her second final in a row. Though she and Sarah were somewhat running the season politically, but couldn't get Cara out, and she was even thrown into elimination at one point due to Abram playing her. She's paired up with Cara on Rivals 1, which is her third consecutive season, and while they were not on the complete outs, they really were not in the inner big circle on the season. They had to win a daily and won 2 eliminations against Camila and Theresa and Janae and Jasmine to make it to the end, where they got second place, which is Laurel's third consecutive second placement. She would take a few years off and return to Free Agents, which is arguably her strongest season. Due to the format, anyone could go into elimination, and she had to take out Jasmine, Anissa, Cara, and Theresa. Some strong names and some not strong names, and she won 4 dailies on the season. So while she was easily the strongest woman on the season, they targeted her, so she had to put in some work to get to the end, and she came out on top where she got her first win. Laurel came back for Invasion of the Champions a few seasons later, and out of the veteran women, she was seemingly the strongest one, as she won a daily and won an elimination against Cara, but she lost the final round before the final to Camila, though some mentioned, I think she kind of stated that she threw it because she knew she wasn't going to win a final that season. Things, unfortunately for her, would take a downhill turn quickly, where she did War of the Worlds 2 a few years later, where she divided the US team by sending home West, then doing the next challenge to get Cara sent home, only for her to be chosen to go into elimination and losing to Ninja in a controversial elimination, where it caused her to be booted on the second women's elimination. Laurel came back a few years later and had her second worst season on Ride or Dies, where she was partnered with Jack, and while they won an elimination against Colleen and Kim, they were booted right afterwards against Anissa and Jordan, which sent her relatively early on the season as well, and they didn't perform well in the dailies, which even she was disappointed by. Laurel didn't wait a long time to return. I believe she returned less than a year later on All Stars 4, and she knew that she needed to make up for her two most recent poor showings. She won 4 dailies on the season. Some of them were team wins, some were partner wins, and some were individual wins. And she was in the bottom group 3 times, but she never went into elimination, and she won the final purge against Avery, securing her star, and she did win the season, though she wouldn't have won without that star twist. On Battle of the Eras 2, Battle of the Eras, I don't know why I said Battle of the Eras 2, she won her first daily, which was the very first daily of the season out of everyone, beating 39 other people, and she was the captain during Era 2's other win. She never went into elimination. We actually did see her throw a daily to get Emily out, which I personally don't think was a bad move, though she started pissing off a lot of people and got purged in the 2/3 portion of the season due to not having as much endurance as the other women. We have seen Laurel thrive in every format, whether it's individual, partner, or team seasons. She's good at eliminations, she's good at dailies, and she has the longevity, but she definitely can be sloppy politically at times, and her emotions get the best out of her. But all of it has me ranking her at number 1 from the era out of the women who debuted in Era 2. So that is how I rank the Era 2 women, and I think this is the most competitive group of women from the challenge history, and due to the time where they debuted, we saw them do some individual seasons, some team seasons, and some pair seasons, and their seasons on average weren't really junky like a lot of the Era 1 seasons, and a lot of them actually became the GOAT out of the women, no matter what era they debuted on, so I did think that was an impressive element. So I'm definitely going to do this with all the other eras and all the other genders within that era. I'm going to wait until 40 ends, which should be in 3 weeks, since there's not going to be an episode next week, and the final will air on the following 2 weeks. So I'll slowly start working on the other 6 videos, but I'll publish them after the 8th, once season 40 has officially aired. Anyways, thank you all for watching, and I'll be back with more content soon. Bye!